The medicine cost them a grandmother's life, but it gave him lungs that built a $50 million empire. Rose V. Watkins, 9 years old and black, saw the dying white boy shivering behind the chain-link fence at Lincoln Elementary. Her family had nothing, worse than nothing. They had someone actively dying who needed that medicine. But she pushed her peanut butter sandwich through the wire anyway, every single day for 6 months. When his pneumonia turned critical, her grandmother handed over the pills meant to keep her own heart beating. No one asked them to. No one would ever know. They just did it. When foster services came for him, Javier made an impossible promise through the fence. "I'll marry you when I'm rich." Rose laughed through tears, then tore her red ribbon in half. She tied one piece around his wrist as the social worker's car door slammed shut. 22 years evaporated like steam. Javier became a CEO, spent 5 years hunting for her, bought 12 buildings in South Chicago, hired 3 separate investigation firms, spent hundreds of thousands, found nothing. No forwarding address after the 2008 collapse, no digital footprint. Victoria Hayes was too common. Rose V. Watkins had vanished like smoke. Tonight, he'd walk into a community meeting at the Southside Community Center, another property he'd bought just to have an excuse to be there. Rose would be sitting in the 3rd row, a faded piece of red ribbon still pinned to her work badge. Neither knew they were 90 minutes away from the reunion that would break them both open.
Javier J. Spencer woke at 5:47 a.m. in a penthouse that cost more than Rose's entire childhood neighborhood. Floor-to-ceil's windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, the sunrise turned the glass towers into pillars of fire. He registered none of it. He never did. The espresso machine, Italian, $6,800, hissed and gurgled. He pressed a button and walked to the shower before the cup finished filling. His walk-in closet held 37 suits, all bespoke, all identical shades of charcoal and navy. He grabbed one without thinking. The apartment was a mausoleum. No photographs, no books with broken spines, no coffee rings on tables. Nothing that suggested a human being actually lived in these 4,000 square feet. It looked like a magazine spread. It felt like a morgue. His phone lit up. His assistant, Miranda. Board meeting 9 a.m. The Riverside development cleared final approval. $11.2 million profit projected Q1. He typed back, "Good." $11.2 million. He felt absolutely nothing. Javier walked to his home office, the one room he kept locked, and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside a climate-controlled glass case sat half of a child's red ribbon, frayed and faded to pink in spots. This was the only thing in his empire that mattered. He touched the glass with 2 fingers, the same ritual he'd performed every morning for 1,825 days straight. "Where are you, Rose?" The board meeting was theater. Applause for the Riverside numbers, handshakes for the expansion into Bronzeville. Congratulations on another flawless quarter. Javier smiled, said the correct words, played the role of the visionary CEO. Inside, he was hollow. His business partner and CFO, Marcus Chen, cornered him in the hallway afterward. "You good, Jay? You've had that look for weeks now." "I'm fine." "You've been fine for 5 years, ever since you started buying up the South Side like you're playing Monopoly with real buildings." Javier said nothing. Marcus leaned in. "There's no ROI on those properties for at least a decade. The board's starting to ask questions. Why specifically South Chicago?" "I have my reasons." Marcus studied his face. "This is still about her, isn't it? The girl from the fence?" Javier's jaw locked. "Drop it." "Maybe she doesn't want to be found, man. Maybe she moved on. Maybe you should—" "I said drop it, Marcus." Marcus raised both hands. "Just don't let this thing consume you." Too late. It had consumed him the moment he felt Rose's grandmother's medicine dissolve on his tongue 22 years ago. Javier sat alone in his office that afternoon, the city buzzing 40 floors below. He opened the file on his desktop labeled Project Ribbon. 5 years of searching. 3 private investigation firms. $340,000 spent. Nothing. The last report from Archer and Webb Investigations sat at the top of the folder. We have exhausted all available leads. Rose V. Watkins yields 47 matches in Illinois alone. Family left no forwarding address after the 2008 financial crisis. No employment records, no property records, no social media presence. Recommend suspending search. He pulled up a map of South Chicago. 12 red pins marked his properties, a constellation of buildings forming a 2-mile radius around Lincoln Elementary School, the place where a 9-year-old girl with braids and a floral dress had saved his life. His logic was simple, maybe delusional. If Rose was still in Chicago, she'd be in that neighborhood. She'd be helping people. That's who she was. Not who she might have become, but who she'd always been, even at 9 years old. So he'd bought the buildings, developed them into affordable housing, created health clinics, built reasons to be there constantly, hoping, waiting, searching every face for the girl who gave up everything. His phone buzzed. Reminder, community meeting tonight, 7 p.m., Southside Community Center, 416 E 51st Street. Topic, new healthcare initiative proposal. Javier stared at the notification. He'd been to 127 community meetings in 5 years. She'd never been at any of them. But he'd go to this one too. He always did. Because one day, the 128th meeting would be different. One day he'd walk into a room and see a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a faded piece of red ribbon, and the 22-year hole in his chest would finally close. He grabbed his coat. Tonight might be that night, or it might be another night of searching for a ghost. He had no idea he was 4 hours away from learning the devastating price Rose's family had paid to keep him breathing, and the woman he'd spent half his life searching for had been searching for him too.
Chicago, 2003. Winter came early that year, and it came for Javier first. He'd been on the streets for 3 weeks when the coughing started. Not the normal kind, the kind that bent him double behind dumpsters, the kind that left dark spots on his sleeve when he pulled his arm away from his mouth. He was 10 years old and weighed 62 pounds, all ribs and elbows and eyes too big for his face. The group home had kicked him out after he'd fought back against one of the older boys. Foster care had nowhere to place him. The system said they were looking. The streets said otherwise. Lincoln Elementary School became his landmark. Every day at noon, kids poured into the fenced playground with lunchboxes and laughter. Javier would press himself against the chain-link barrier on the outside, watching, invisible. Sometimes he'd find half a sandwich in the trash bins after they went back inside. Sometimes he'd find nothing. On the 4th day of the 2nd week, he felt eyes on him. A black girl with cornrows and a floral dress 2 sizes too big stood on the other side of the fence, 10 feet away. She was small, younger than the other 4th graders, with knobby knees and scuffed shoes held together with duct tape. But her eyes weren't scared. They were steady. She walked closer. Javier didn't move, couldn't move. His body had started shaking an hour ago and hadn't stopped. The girl looked around, checking for teachers, for witnesses, then reached into her brown paper bag. She pulled out a red apple, shiny and perfect, and pushed it through one of the diamond-shaped openings in the fence. Javier stared at it. "Take it," she whispered, "before someone sees." He grabbed the apple with trembling fingers. It was gone in 4 bites, core and all. The girl smiled, sad and knowing. "You're really hungry, huh?" Javier nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. "I'm Rose. What's your name?" "Javier," his voice cracked. "Javier Spencer." "Okay, Javier Spencer. I'll see you tomorrow." She did, and the day after that, and the day after that. For 6 months, Rose V. Watkins appeared at the fence during lunch. Some days it was half her sandwich, peanut butter on white bread. Some days it was crackers wrapped in a napkin. Once it was a full juice box she'd saved from breakfast.
She never explained why, never asked him questions, just pushed food through the wire, smiled, and went back to her friends. Javier stopped going through trash bins. He started waiting by the fence at 11:55 every morning, his only certainty in a world that had forgotten him. Then the pneumonia came, and even Rose's sandwiches couldn't fight what was growing in his lungs. The day he collapsed against the fence, too weak to stand, Rose ran to get her grandmother. And that's when everything changed. That's when the Watkins family made a choice that would echo across 22 years, across a $50 million empire, across the space between a promise and a tragedy that neither child could have imagined.
Rose's grandmother was named Eleanor Watkins, and she was dying slowly in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like menthol rub and old flowers. The day Javier collapsed against the fence, Rose sprinted the 4 blocks home, bursting through the door with tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother sat in the worn armchair by the window, oxygen tank hissing beside her, a mystery novel open in her lap. "Baby girl, what's wrong?" "It's the boy from the fence. He fell down and he won't wake up and his skin is hot like fire and—" Eleanor closed her book. "Show me." Rose's mother tried to stop them. "Mama, you can't walk that far. Your heart." "My heart will do what it's told for 10 more minutes." Eleanor grabbed her cane. "Let's go." They found Javier where he'd fallen, curled against the chain link like something discarded. His lips were blue. His breathing sounded like wet paper tearing. Eleanor knelt beside him with a sound that might have been a prayer or a curse. She pressed her hand to his forehead, then his neck. "Pneumonia, advanced. He needs a hospital." "We can call 911, Rose's mother said. "And they'll take him where? County? You know how they treat kids like him. Street kids, system kids." Eleanor's jaw set. "No, we take him home." They carried Javier back to the apartment, Rose's uncle helping, her mother protesting the whole way. They laid him on the pull-out couch in the living room. His temperature was 104. Rose's mother made calls. Emergency rooms wanted insurance cards they didn't have. Free clinics had week-long waits. The neighborhood doctor wanted $200 up front for a house call. The Watkins family had $47 in their checking account. Eleanor disappeared into her bedroom. When she came back, she was holding a small orange prescription bottle, half full. Her name was on the label, Digitalis, for congestive heart failure. "Mama, no!" Rose's mother's voice broke. "That's your emergency supply. Dr. Martinez said if you run out before your next appointment, this boy is someone's emergency too. You could die." "I'm 73 years old with a bad heart and good memories. He's 10 with pneumonia and no one." Eleanor pressed the bottle into her daughter's hand. "I've lived. Let him try." Rose watched from the doorway as her mother crushed the pills, mixed them with honey and warm water, and coaxed the mixture down Javier's throat. He was too far gone to resist, too weak to understand what was being poured into him. For 3 days he burned with fever in their living room. Rose sat beside him, changing the cold washcloths on his forehead, whispering promises that he'd be okay. Her grandmother sat in her chair, breathing a little harder each day, oxygen tank working overtime. On the 4th day, Javier's fever broke. On the 18th day, Eleanor Watkins' heart failed in her sleep. The medicine that saved Javier's lungs had been the only thing keeping her grandmother's heart beating steady. Without it, without the ability to refill the prescription for another 2 weeks, Eleanor's body had simply given up. Rose was 9 years old when she learned that love sometimes costs everything. Javier was 10 years old when he became a debt that could never be repaid. The social worker arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Eleanor's funeral. Javier had been living in the Watkins apartment, sleeping on the pull-out couch, eating what little food Rose's mother could stretch across 4 mouths instead of 3. He'd gained 12 pounds. His cough was gone. But the system had finally caught up with him.
Miss Patterson from Child Protective Services stood in the doorway with a clipboard and an expression that said she'd seen this story 1,000 times before. "Javier Spencer, we have a placement for you." Rose's mother tried. "He can stay here. We'll figure out the paperwork. Ma'am, you're currently receiving housing assistance for a one-bedroom unit with 3 occupants. Adding an unrelated minor would violate your lease and jeopardize your benefits." Miss Patterson's voice wasn't unkind, just tired. "He needs to come with me now." Javier looked at Rose. She was wearing the red ribbon in her hair, the one her grandmother had given her on her 8th birthday, the last gift before the medicine ran out. "Can I say goodbye?" he asked. Miss Patterson checked her watch. 2 minutes. They walked to the fence at Lincoln Elementary, the place where everything had started. The school day had ended. The playground was empty except for scattered leaves and a forgotten jump rope. Rose's hands were shaking. "Where are they taking you?" "Group home on the north side. She said it's temporary." "Temporary means you'll come back, right?" Javier wanted to lie, wanted to promise something he had no power to give, but he'd learned honesty from the Watkins family. "I don't know." Rose pulled the ribbon from her hair. It was cheap satin, the kind from a dollar store, already fraying at the edges. She'd worn it every day for a year. She tore it in half with her teeth. "Here." She tied one piece around his wrist, knotting it 3 times. "So you don't forget me." "I could never forget you. Promise me something." Her voice was fierce, desperate. "Promise me you'll do something big with your life. My grandmother died for you. You have to make it worth it."
The weight of that demand crushed down on his 10-year-old shoulders. Make a life worth a life. Repay a debt that could never be balanced. "I promise," he whispered. Rose wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And when you're rich and famous and too important to remember people like us, I'll come back." The words came out before he could think. "When I'm rich, I'll come back and marry you, just like in the movies." Rose laughed through her tears, the sound breaking in the middle. "That's stupid." "I mean it. You're 10 years old." "I still mean it." Miss Patterson called from the car. "Javier, now!" He started walking backward, keeping his eyes on Rose. She stood at the fence with half a red ribbon in her hand and grief too big for a 9-year-old face. "I'll find you," he shouted. "I don't care how long it takes." "You better," Rose shouted back, "because I'll be waiting." The car door slammed. Miss Patterson pulled into traffic. Javier pressed his face against the window, watching Rose get smaller and smaller until she was just a dot, then a memory, then a promise he'd spend 22 years trying to keep. The ribbon stayed on his wrist for 3 years until it finally disintegrated. By then, he'd already memorized every thread.
Javier made his first million at 27. The second came 6 months later. By 28, he'd built a tech consulting empire that Fortune 500 companies paid obscene amounts to access. He celebrated by hiring his first private investigator. Daniel Reeves came recommended, expensive, thorough. He sat across from Javier in a downtown office that still smelled like fresh paint and asked the standard questions. Full name? Rose V. Watkins, middle name unknown. Last known address? Javier recited the South Side apartment from memory, the numbers burned into his brain like a brand. Date of birth? 1994, I think. She was 9 when I was 10. Reeves looked up. You think? We were kids. I never saw a birth certificate. Any family members? Social security number? School records? Javier's hands tightened on the armrests. I was 10 years old and homeless. I didn't exactly ask for documentation. Reeves nodded, writing. This might take a while. 3 months later, he came back with a file 2 inches thick and nothing useful inside. Rose V. Watkins is a common name. I found 43 matches in Illinois alone, 19 in Chicago. Without a middle name, date of birth, or social security number, I can't narrow it down. The address you gave me, the building was condemned in 2009. No forwarding address on file. The elementary school has records, but they're protected under privacy laws. Without proof of relationship or legal standing, you can't access them. So you're saying it's impossible? I'm saying it's expensive and unlikely. I can keep looking, but keep looking. Investigator number 2 lasted 14 months. Sarah Chen was younger, hungrier, willing to bend rules Reeves wouldn't touch. She bribed a clerk at the school district office, cross-referenced utility bills, tracked down former teachers.
She found 3 Rose Watkins who'd attended Lincoln Elementary between 2000 and 2005. One was white, one was Hispanic, one was the right age and race, but her middle initial was T, not V, and her family had moved to Atlanta in 2006 with a clear paper trail. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. The V might have been a nickname, a confirmation name, something that wouldn't appear in official records, or the family might have been undocumented, which would explain the lack of documentation after 2008. Try the obituaries. Her grandmother died in 2003, Eleanor Watkins. Sarah found 17 Eleanor Watkins obituaries in Chicago between 2002 and 2004. None listed a granddaughter named Rose. Year 3 brought Marcus Webb, an ex-cop who specialized in cold cases. He approached it like a missing person investigation, built timelines, conducted interviews with people who'd lived in the neighborhood 2 decades ago. Most were gone. Some were dead. The few who remembered anything remembered a little girl who'd moved away after her grandmother died. No one knew where. The 2008 financial crisis wiped out half the South Side, Webb explained. Families lost homes, scattered to cheaper neighborhoods, moved in with relatives across state lines. Records were lost, addresses changed, people disappeared into the cracks. If the Watkins family was already struggling, they would have been among the first to go. So she's gone. I'm saying if she's still in Chicago, she's invisible, and if she left, she could be anywhere in the country. By year 5, Javier had spent $340,000 on 3 investigators and gotten nowhere. The ribbon fragment sat in its glass case on his desk, a relic of a promise he couldn't keep. His assistant found him staring at it one evening, the city lights blinking on below. "Sir, the South Chicago properties. The board wants to know the long-term strategy." Javier didn't look away from the ribbon. "Buy more." "More?" "Every building within 2 miles of Lincoln Elementary. If she's still there, still helping people the way she always did, I'll find her. I'll buy the whole neighborhood if I have to. And if she's not there, then I'll have built something that matters to people like her. Either way, I win." But winning felt a lot like losing when you were chasing a ghost who might not want to be found.
Javier drove himself to the south side on a Wednesday afternoon, refusing the driver Marcus insisted he needed. Some journeys required solitude. The Tesla felt obscene on these streets. Every pothole rattled his teeth, every crumbling curb a reminder that his world and this world existed in different economies. He parked outside Lincoln Elementary and sat with the engine running, staring at the chain-link fence that had once separated him from salvation. The school looked smaller, sadder. The playground equipment he remembered, bright red and yellow, full of shrieking kids, had been replaced with weathered plastic, faded to pink and mustard. Half the swings had missing seats. The basketball hoop had no net. He got out of the car, walked to the fence, put his fingers through the diamond-shaped wire the way he'd done 22 years ago when his hands were small and desperate and reaching for an apple from a girl who had no reason to care. The building where Rose had lived was 4 blocks east. Javier walked it, counting his steps the way he used to count his breaths when the cold made his chest hurt. 273 steps. It used to feel like miles. The apartment building was still standing, but barely. Condemned notices plastered the door. Windows on the second floor were boarded up, graffiti spelling out names of people who'd probably also disappeared. The steps where Rose's uncle used to sit and smoke were cracked concrete, weeds growing through the gaps. Javier stood on the sidewalk and tried to remember what it looked like when it was home, when Eleanor sat in the window with her oxygen tank and waved at kids walking to school,
when Rose's mother hung laundry on the fire escape, sheets snapping in the wind, when it was a place where people sacrificed everything for a dying boy they didn't know. Now it was just another corpse in a neighborhood full of them. He walked further. The corner store where Rose used to buy her lunch supplies was shuttered, metal gates rusted shut. The church where Eleanor's funeral had been held was now a payday loan place with bulletproof glass and a security guard. The park where kids played in summer was littered with needles and broken bottles, the fountain long dry. This was what he'd escaped. This was what Rose might still be living in. The guilt hit him like a fist.
He'd built a $50 million empire while the place that saved him rotted from the inside out. He'd bought properties, sure, developed affordable housing, opened a health clinic. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Every renovated building was one drop of water against a wildfire of neglect. A woman walked past him, maybe 60, pushing a shopping cart full of aluminum cans. She looked at his suit, his watch, his shoes that cost more than her monthly rent, and her expression said everything. You don't belong here anymore. She was right. Javier returned to his car, sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, surrounded by leather and screens and climate control. Outside, a group of kids walked past, maybe 10 years old, laughing about something. One of them was small, skinny, with a coat too thin for the weather. Javier saw himself in that boy, and he saw every version of himself that could have been, should have been, would have been, if not for a girl with a red ribbon and a grandmother willing to die. He pulled out his phone, called Marcus. Buy everything, every property within 5 miles. I don't care what it costs. Javier, that's not a sound investment strategy. I'm not investing, I'm repaying. He hung up, started the engine, drove back toward the glass towers and pristine streets of a Chicago that felt like a different planet. But tonight he'd return. Tonight there was a community meeting at 7 p.m., and he'd sit in the back row like he always did, scanning faces, searching for the one person who could make any of this mean something. The woman who'd turned a dying boy into a man with a debt he could never settle.
The Southside Community Center smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Javier arrived at 6:45 p.m., took his usual seat in the back row, and prepared for another evening of scanning faces that would never be hers. 43 people filtered in. He cataloged each one. Wrong age, wrong height, wrong everything. The meeting started at 7:02. A woman at the front discussed the new healthcare initiative, free medical screenings for seniors, prescription assistance programs, mobile clinics for underserved blocks. Javier had funded it all through shell companies, anonymously, the way he funded everything in this neighborhood. He was checking his phone when he heard the question from the third row. Will the program cover heart medications, specifically digitalis? The voice stopped his breath. He looked up. Third row, center seat, a woman in her early 30s, brown skin, hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing scrubs with a hospital ID badge clipped to the pocket. Her face was older, carved by years he hadn't witnessed, but the eyes were exactly the same, kind, fierce, unmistakable. And pinned to her badge, faded and frayed, was half of a red ribbon. Javier stood without meaning to. The movement drew her attention. Their eyes met across 27 rows of folding chairs and 22 years of searching. Rose's hand went to her mouth. The meeting continued around them, voices discussing budget allocations and distribution schedules, but Javier heard none of it. He walked down the side aisle like a man in a dream. Rose stood, trembling, and met him in the narrow space between chairs and wall. They stared at each other. No words. Not yet. Javier reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the small glass case containing his half of the ribbon, held it up so she could see. Rose's eyes filled with tears. "You kept it." "I never stopped looking for you." "I know. I've been watching you buy the neighborhood for 5 years. I knew it was you. Her voice broke.
I didn't think you'd want to see me." "Why would you think that?" Rose pulled him outside, away from the meeting, into the parking lot where the streetlight flickered and died and came back weak. She turned to face him, and he saw the weight she'd been carrying, the same weight that lived in his chest. "Your grandmother died because of you, Javier." The words were a knife between his ribs. 3 weeks after you left, her heart gave out because we gave you her medicine, the medicine she needed to stay alive. We chose you over her."
Javier's legs went weak. He'd known, somewhere deep and unexamined, but hearing it confirmed was different. Worse. "Rose, I was 9 years old when I learned that saving one life means losing another. Do you know what that does to a kid? Watching your grandmother die and knowing it's because you pushed a sandwich through a fence. You saved me. I killed her." "No." Javier's voice came out fierce, desperate. "Your grandmother made a choice. She was dying anyway, wasn't she? The heart condition. She had 2 years left, maybe 3 with the medication. We got 3 weeks. The math was brutal, simple, undeniable. "I've spent 22 years trying to be worth it," Javier whispered. "Worth her sacrifice, worth your sacrifice. I built an empire thinking if I was successful enough, rich enough, important enough, it would somehow balance the scales. But it doesn't, does it? Nothing balances this." Rose wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the same gesture she'd used at the fence when she was 9. "She told my mother something before she gave you the medicine. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." "What did she say?" "She said, 'I've lived. Let him try.'" Rose's voice steadied. "She didn't die for a billionaire, Javier. She died for a boy who had a spark, a boy who deserved a chance." "I don't know if I've earned it." "Neither do I." Rose looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the boy she'd fed through chain link. "But you're here. You came back. That has to count for something." The streetlight flickered again. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. "I promised I'd marry you when I got rich," Javier said. Rose laughed, the sound wet and broken and somehow still hopeful. "We were children. I still mean it." "You're insane." "Probably." He held out his hand, the one with the glass case. "But I spent 22 years keeping this safe. I think I can manage forever." Rose stared at his hand, at the ribbon, at the man who'd been the starving boy. "Ask me tomorrow," she finally said, "when we've both had time to figure out if this is grief or grace." "Tomorrow, then." She nodded, turned to go, then stopped. "Javier, my grandmother's name was Eleanor Watkins. If you're going to carry her death, at least know who she was." "I'll never forget." Rose walked back into the community center, back to the meeting, back to her work of saving the neighborhood one person at a time. Javier stood in the parking lot, holding half a ribbon and the weight of a life exchanged for his own. Tomorrow, he'd ask her again. Tonight, he'd finally grieve the woman who died so he could live. Tomorrow came, and the day after that, and 300 more. Javier asked Rose to marry him on a Tuesday morning, 9 months after the reunion, standing at the fence where it all began. She said yes with tears in her eyes and her grandmother's name on her lips. But before the wedding, there was work to do. Rose quit her job at County Hospital and walked into Javier's downtown office wearing jeans and a jacket with paint stains on the sleeves. His executive team stared as she dropped a folder on the conference table. "These are the 12 blocks with the highest mortality rates in South Chicago. Seniors dying from preventable illnesses because they can't afford medications. Kids with asthma who've never seen a specialist. Diabetics rationing insulin." She looked at Javier. "You wanted to repay a debt? Here's how we do it." They launched the Rose Legacy Foundation 3 months later, not with a gala or a press release, but with a single mobile clinic parked outside Lincoln Elementary on a Saturday morning. Rose worked triage while Javier unloaded supplies, his $3,000 suit replaced with a volunteer t-shirt that said, "Healthcare is a human right." The first patient was an elderly man with congestive heart failure who'd been skipping his digitalis to afford groceries. Rose held his hand while the nurse checked his vitals. Javier saw her eyes go distant, somewhere back to a grandmother and a choice and a boy who'd stolen years without meaning to. "Free prescriptions for life, Mr. Johnson," Rose said. "No exceptions, no paperwork, just come back every month." The man cried. Javier understood why. Over the next year, they opened 4 permanent clinics, hired 16 doctors, established a prescription assistance program that served 800 families, built the Eleanor Watkins Medical Center on the exact spot where her apartment building had stood, condemned and forgotten. Marcus confronted Javier in his office one evening, spreadsheets in hand. "You've diverted $23 million from company assets in 18 months. The board is getting nervous." "Then replace me." "Javier, I spent 22 years thinking wealth was the destination, that if I was rich enough, successful enough, I'd finally feel like I'd earned the right to be alive." Javier looked at the ribbon in its glass case, now displayed beside a photo of Eleanor Watkins that Rose had given him. "I was wrong. Wealth isn't the destination, it's the tool." "A tool for what?" "For making sure no other grandmother has to choose between her life and a child's. No other 9-year-old has to carry that weight." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You're different since you found her." "I'm awake. There's a difference."
The foundation grew, not into Javier's legacy, but into their shared mission. Rose handled the community outreach, knew every patient by name, remembered their stories. Javier handled the infrastructure, the funding, the systemic barriers that money could actually dismantle. They made an odd pair, the billionaire CEO in tailored suits and the former social worker in scrubs, walking through the South Side like missionaries of a gospel neither had asked to preach. But it worked. The mortality rate in their target area dropped 18% in 2 years. Emergency room visits for preventable conditions decreased by 34%. 3 elderly patients named their grandchildren Eleanor. One night, after a particularly long day at the Watkins Center, Rose found Javier sitting in his car outside the building, staring at nothing. She knocked on the window. He unlocked the door. She slid into the passenger seat. "You okay?" "We saved 43 people today. Prescription refills, insulin, blood pressure medication. 43 lives that might have been cut short. That's good, right? Your grandmother was 1 life. 43 feels like I'm getting closer to even." Rose took his hand. "You'll never be even, Javier. That's not how grace works. She didn't save you so you could spend your life trying to repay her. She saved you so you could live, actually live." "Am I? Living?" Rose smiled, sad and knowing. "You're getting there. We both are." They sat in silence, watching people leave the clinic with bags of medication they didn't have to choose over food, over rent, over survival. The debt would never be repaid. But maybe, Javier thought, that was the point. Maybe the only way to honor a sacrifice that big was to keep giving it forward, one prescription at a time, until the day he died. And then maybe Eleanor Watkins would finally be able to rest.
They were married on a Saturday in April at the chain-link fence outside Lincoln Elementary, 23 years after a starving boy first pressed his face against the wire. No cathedral, no string quartet, no guest list of business partners and board members. Just 47 people who lived within walking distance, folding chairs borrowed from the community center, and a pastor from the church that used to be a payday loan place until the foundation bought it back. Rose wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit, yellowed lace and all. Javier wore a simple black suit and the original piece of red ribbon tied around his wrist, preserved in a thin layer of protective coating that made it stiff but kept it whole. The vows were short, traditional. But when Javier said for richer or poorer, his voice broke, and everyone understood why. They kissed while kids from the neighborhood cheered. Someone's cousin had brought speakers and played music from a phone. Folding tables appeared, covered with potluck dishes, aluminum trays of fried chicken and mac and cheese and sweet potato pie. It was chaotic, imperfect, nothing like the wedding a billionaire was supposed to have. It was perfect. As the sun dropped lower, painting the brick buildings gold, Rose and Javier walked away from the reception, back to the fence. They stood there quietly, fingers intertwined, looking at the playground where children still played despite the broken swings and faded equipment. "We should fix this place," Rose said. "The playground, make it beautiful again. I'll have the contractor here Monday." Rose laughed. "You can't solve everything with money, you know." "I know, but I can solve this with money, so I will." Movement caught Javier's eye. A small figure by the dumpsters behind the school, partially hidden in shadow. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, thin as a wire, wearing a jacket with holes in both elbows. He was going through the trash from the reception, looking for leftover food. Javier's breath stopped. Rose saw him too. Her hand tightened on his. The boy looked up, noticed them watching, and froze like a deer, ready to run. "Wait," Javier called out softly. "Don't go." Rose was already walking toward the reception tables. She returned with a plate piled high, food still warm, wrapped in a napkin. She approached the fence where the boy stood on the other side, his eyes wide and wary. "What's your name?" Rose asked gently. The boy didn't answer. "It's okay, you don't have to tell me." She pushed the plate through the diamond-shaped opening in the chain link, the same way she'd pushed sandwiches and apples 23 years ago. "This is for you, all of it. No one's gonna take it back."
The boy grabbed the plate with shaking hands, started eating immediately, too hungry for manners or caution. Javier knelt down beside Rose. "Where do you live?" The boy swallowed. "Nowhere. Everywhere. You got family?" Head shake, eyes down. Rose looked at Javier. Javier looked at Rose. No words needed. They'd been here before, on opposite sides of the fence, 23 years younger, but feeling the exact same pull. "What's your name?" Javier asked again, softer this time. "Marcus." "Okay, Marcus, here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish that plate. Then we're going to sit down and talk, and then we're going to figure this out together. Sound good?" The boy nodded, still chewing. Rose stood, brushing off her grandmother's wedding dress. She took Javier's hand. Behind them, their wedding reception continued, voices and laughter carrying across the playground. In front of them, a hungry boy ate like it might be his last meal. "The cycle continues," Rose whispered. "Different this time. Better, because we're here. We know what hunger feels like, what it costs to survive it, and what it costs to save someone from it." They stood together at the fence, the place where everything had begun and would now begin again. A billionaire and a social worker, a boy who'd been saved and a girl who'd done the saving. Two halves of a red ribbon tied together at last. Marcus finished his plate and looked up at them with hope and fear warring in his eyes. Javier smiled and thought of Eleanor Watkins, her oxygen tank hissing, her heart failing, her hands giving away pills that were meant to keep her alive. "I've lived," she'd said. "Let him try." Now it was his turn to say the same. "Come on, Marcus," Javier said, opening the gate in the fence that he had had installed last month, the one that was never locked. "Let's get you somewhere warm, and then we'll talk about what comes next." The boy hesitated, then stepped through. The cycle continued. The debt was paid forward. And somewhere, Javier believed, Eleanor Watkins finally smiled.
Eleanor Watkins gave her last breath so a starving boy could have a first chance. 23 years later, that boy became a man who refused to let her sacrifice be forgotten. If this story reminded you that one act of kindness can echo across decades, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, stories about the debts we carry and the grace we pass forward, deserve to be told. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe love is the most expensive gift we can give.